Hello, welcome to episode number 5 of the Artisan Traveller Podcast. And with me today is comedian and composer and Geordie, Mr. Richard Morton. How are you?
Yeah, all those things, thank you, Chris, and in the right order. I'm very well, thank you, and thank you for having me on your show.
No problem at all, it's an absolute pleasure. I remember seeing you back at the Funhouse, I believe it was, in Barton's PLC.
Yeah.
Closing the show with an amazing set. You're a musical comedian, but what for you came first? Was it music or comedy?
Yeah, it was the music. I started out as a musician and trying to be a serious musician, but I used to do gigs in little clubs and pubs and stuff in London, and I just used to lark around, or I'd just sort of tell little stories or jokes in between the songs. And the act I was in, the Panic Brothers, in the mid 80s, was actually a serious music act, but the comedy added to the sort of dimension of it, the dynamics, and people would say, "Oh, you're a funny guy, Rich. We should get gigs in comedy clubs." And at that time in the 80s in London, it was kind of the cabaret circuit more than the comedy circuit. So you could do gigs in clubs with proper stand-ups and then have a music act as well, who didn't have to be wildly funny, but just a few witty songs. So we got those gigs. And then the more laughs you get, as you know, Chris, once you're on stage, the more addictive it becomes. So I started writing comedy songs and like proper little jokes in between the songs as well, and that would make a completely different dynamic and set for the Panic Brothers, and we became a comedy act by default.
That's incredible. So I remember when I was at the Fringe in August, you put a picture on Facebook from 1994, and it was a poster of your Fringe experience, and the headline, I believe it was, or the tagline was the Northeast answer to Billy Connolly. Was that the Musical Association? Or?
Oh, I think that was the agency, to be honest with you, Chris, because that was a bit embarrassing, because it was too much of a quote, I thought. And I think somebody said it in that sort of way that, you know, if you're from a certain place and you've got a guitar and you've got a sort of a cheeky, I don't know, whatever it is, maybe regional kind of a comic act, that was an example you could say, oh, it's like a Billy Connolly or whatever. So, Billy Connolly is a comedy god, so I was a bit embarrassed by that. But of course, you know, agents and promoters like whack that on the poster and we'll see how many people we get in. So I would never, ever pretend to be in that sort of league.
Do you remember your experience at the Fringe in '94? Do you remember how that was?
I do, because that was the first solo show I did, the first 1 hour show. And before then, I'd been up to Edinburgh with the Panic Brothers from the late 80s, from 86. And we did little spots in clubs and the late and live show when it was very, very new. And then did our own 1 hour show. And we sort of progressed to the Pleasance Cabaret Bar to do a 1 hour show in 89. And then when the Panic split up that year, I missed Edinburgh in 90 because I didn't have an hour. And then I wrote, an hour, but I didn't feel fully confident to do it. So I waited till 94, and in 92 and 93 I did shows with Joe Brand and Jenny LaCote and Fred McCauley and Lynn Ferguson as a sort of a group thing. I put them all together in one group, by the way, but they were actually separate shows. And then by 94 I thought, right, I've got an hour that I can do, because I didn't kind of want to go out there too quickly, because I think once you've gone to Edinburgh and everyone knows you, then you've set your stall out, and I think some acts might try and get there too quickly or kind of jump the gun a bit. So 94 was great, and it was my kind of breakthrough year in a way that people went, oh yeah, he's not just that one half of the Panic Brothers guy anymore, he's like, a proper comic.
You've made an identity for yourself off the back of Edinburgh.
I'd like to think so, but yeah, even the Billy Connolly poster sort of set it back a bit. But all those Edinburgh runs, they kind of blur a little bit, but because that was the first one in the Wildman Room in the Assemblies, I don't think it's there anymore, that venue, by the way. It was a great run for me, so I was very pleased.
That's amazing. So you've been a comedian now for, coming out to 25, 30
Yeah,
years?
it's actually, it's 30 now, so end of 89, early 90, I started, yeah.
And you still get the same buzz you did when you first stepped on stage?
I do, and people say, Rich, are you mad or something? Why haven't you retired by now? Or why haven't you hung up your microphone and your plectrums? It's because I still love to entertain, and when you get out there, for so many gigs I do now, because I'm not famous per se, it's like audiences going, well, who's this guy? And you've got to start from scratch. So every gig, in a way, is like an expositional thing, where you start from the point of thinking they don't know who you are and you must establish yourself, to the end of your set when you think, hopefully, I've made them all laugh. So that alone, it keeps you going, because it's different every night. And as you know, you do some jokes on one night that go better than others, and then vice versa, and some things you say work better, and it's never a sort of foregone conclusion. So I never think of it as a sort of a routine or an act that I'm just kind of trolling out there, because I always try and think of it as something new for each time, and it keeps the excitement going.
Definitely, yeah, that's a good way to think of it. And having seen your act, it's obviously high energy as well.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, because I'm 29 now, Chris, and I'm slowing down a bit.
You're lucky this is audio only.
Good one.
I'm practicing. Yeah, I've got a couple of gigs myself lined up.
Okay, yes.
Very, very far away from here.
Mm-hmm.
Would you advise actually going further out of sort of where you live or where you're from when you first start out, or do you sort of go with the home crowd feel?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea to go as far as you can in a way, because firstly, so when I became solo in 1990, I tried to avoid all the really big clubs for a while, like the Comedy Store and places, because I didn't feel ready for it. And secondly, I didn't want to go back to Newcastle and do shows for the same reason as, when they say a prophet's seldom, what's that phrase, in his own land,
Yeah.
Made, I was going to say, because we didn't make any money in those days. But you know what I'm saying? It's like when you're from a place, it's like, oh, he's just from around the corner. We don't, we want to see somebody from London or whatever.
That.
So I think when you can actually go and cut your teeth in places and then come back to wherever it is you want to be, that's pretty good. And the same applies to Edinburgh. I didn't want to go there too soon. I wanted to make sure I had a decent amount of material. Yeah.
I suppose you have to really for an hour show as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard enough getting your first 10 and 20 together. And also, once you've got your first 20 together, it's very tempting to keep it. And so, and as you know, new material is the key for acts. And I'm saying this because I don't do enough new material for myself. I try my hardest to keep putting new stuff in. But when I started, my turnover was much greater, because as soon as you've established yourself a little bit, and people say, oh yeah, come back in, a month or 2 months or 3 months, you've got to try and add something new. And if I played at places like the Comedy Store, I'd always try and add some, even if it was just one joke from the previous show that I'd done there, just so that people think, oh yeah, you're still adding. And it is a really good thing when you're starting out, because it helps you as a comic, and it helps your act, and it helps your reputation. So new material's really key.
And you've been quite instrumental in writing jokes for other comedians, reading through your bio.
I've done. Oh, thank you. I've done a few. When I started out, one of the luckiest breaks I got was at the Comedy Store in 1991. I was asked to do the Cutting Edge show, which is still going today on a Tuesday. It's amazing. And it was properly topical in those days. You had to write every week. And I was on with Mark Thomas, Nick Revell, Kevin Day, Eddie Izzard, Joe Brown. They're all top comics. And they were way ahead of me, because I was just the guy basically with the guitar. That's how I got that gig. They wanted somebody musical on the show every week. And I kind of learned how to write jokes on a very quick basis, because I was dropped in the deep end with them. And so I quickly thought, oh, right, I've got to write between this Tuesday and next Tuesday. I need new stuff. And you had to. So it made me a much quicker and better writer. And also by about 93, I had reams of material. So when I was saying about the 94 show, that's why, because I had a lot of material to do.
Oh, okay.
And I left that show at the same time, and I slightly took my foot off the pedal, I have to say. But it established my reputation, luckily, with other actors I was working with, like Jack Dee. And he just said, oh, Rich, come and write for me. So he got me a gig on his TV show in 97, 98 on ITV. And again, it was a topical thing. So he had to come up with like 10 good jokes every week, which was a bit of a do. Because, I mean, deadline day was like Thursday. So by Wednesday night, I was tearing my hair out. Because it's like school. And you had to go in there with, even though it wasn't before, it was before your iPhones and stuff, with a sheet of paper and like 1 to 10 and jokes. And Jack Dee would go, yeah, no, yeah, no. And then even then on the show, you might even get 1 or 2 of your gags actually, broadcast live. Because he had about 5 writers working for him.
I was going to say we would have had a number of people presumably doing that, so otherwise you're relying on sort of...
Oh yeah, and better ones than me. And I remember some of the writers then just amazing, like machines, and they would like just knock out these top gags, and I'd be like, wandering around me flat for a day going, right, it starts with this bit, and then this is the middle bit, and then these guys were just like da-da-da-da-da. So it's a good discipline as well to make yourself right.
Do you work from the perspective of what's funny and then kind of build around it to create a joke?
Yeah, sort of. It's like, or if you've got a subject that you want to write about, and I think it's important to write about things that you're emotionally investing something in. I think it's a real talent if you can write a joke off the top of your head about anything and it's funny. They're comedy writers; they can do that. But I think for stand-ups, a lot of the time, because you're out there doing it every night and you've got to, repeat the lines. I think you have to feel involved in it, and I think audiences know the things you actually believe in and things you really want to talk about, as opposed to stuff you're just saying to get a laugh. So it's finding those subjects that you have to, stick with. And so for a lot of comics, when you start out, it's where you're from or your upbringing stuff, because, you're on safe ground, you know what you're doing. But past that point, you have to find subjects that enthuse you and you think will also enthuse the audience. And I think it's important for somebody like me, because I've been going so long, that when I walk out there, they're not going to go, no, this guy's got nothing relevant to me. So even when I'm playing to, audiences where people are like half my age now, I've got to think, right, I've got to have stuff to keep them, involved. So I try and deal with subjects that everyone's interested in and that I'm interested in talking about as well.
It's a lot easier, isn't it? I find that when I'm writing as well, that if a subject is, not personable to me, or if it's recognisable to me, then it's a lot easier to write around that joke. But do you find that, I found this recently actually, I had to confirm a joke, basically it was a duplicated joke by complete accident, pure word association. I won't give away the joke, but I had to check with a very famous one-liner comedian on the Midlands circuit.
Yeah.
And it just happened to be a joke that he'd written, but completely the other way around. It was really strange. It's for someone who's literally starting, in basic writing of comedy.
It's easily done, Chris, and easier than you would think. Because I think, again, I can give you an example. When I wrote on the Jack Dee show, if there was a story in the news that Jack wanted to cover, and he'd say, right, this is the story, and it was like something in the newspaper, something on the news, and he gave it to 5 writers, I guarantee if 5 writers write 5 jokes each, a lot of them will be duplicated on the same subject, because that's the subject. And also, there's a finite amount of jokes and an amount of ways to approach a joke. So if we picked a subject now, we'd know exactly where we think that joke's going to be. If you go for a Boris Johnson thing, you think, right, I know where I think these punchlines will be. So probably a room full of comics will duplicate without any problem, because that's where we see the funniness. And I think when you get out in the circuit and people say, oh, you've got a joke similar to somebody else's, it's a bit of a shocker. And I don't think anyone tries to go out there and nick jokes. But if you've got a joke that's similar, I'd say to whoever the comic is, I've got this line, or I'd contact them and say, is that all right with you? And I've actually done gigs sometimes when it's been a topical thing and I've got a joke and I've gone in and there's somebody on stage doing I think, they've done my joke now. But it's because it's, sometimes we go for an obvious line. It's only if something's completely obscure and contrived and somebody's got it word for word that you go, whoa, wait a minute. So sadly, as you'll know, naming no names, that has happened. But it's usually the case that, it's like that old great minds think alike adage, that you'll come up with a joke same as another comic.
Definitely, because obviously the funny part of the joke is, what people are working around, and naturally you're going to get to that destination.
Yes.
Regardless.
Yes.
To be fair to the comic that had written the joke, he was really good about it, and he actually said to me, look, you can use it in your format because it was slightly different. So there's kind of like a camaraderie almost amongst comics. It's very easy, I guess, well, from the outset to look at it as if people would be defensive about it. But it's lovely to see that people actually are willing to help you out. No, that's
great, and I think whoever that is, a top name, is probably a top name for that very reason, that they're professional about the whole thing, and also, if there's new acts coming through and they've obviously got material that they've taken from established acts, it's quickly spotted, and someone will tap them on the shoulder and just say, that's a Lee Evans gag, or that's a Jack Dee gag or something. And sometimes they don't even realise they've done it. It's just thinking, oh, this is funny, and I think that can happen to all of us. You can be walking along going, oh, I've got a great idea for a joke, and then you get home and you go, oh, that's from a video I was watching, or a DVD of Eddie Izzard or something, and you just think, I'm glad I've stopped myself before I get out there. But usually it's a case of sort of, duplicating something with good intent.
So speaking of Mr. Evans, you've performed with him, I believe, was it the 98 Live in Scotland show and a subsequent tour?
Oh, I did absolutely loads, Chris. I met Lee Evans back in the late 80s when he was still a kid. And he was on the old-fashioned club circuit from up north, because his dad was. and he had this very odd act with kind of props and things in. A real oddball act, very funny, but kind of really crazy. And he said, I want to get into what was then the alternative comedy thing. And it was like chalk and cheese. It's like the old circuit was, guys in frilly shirts and bow ties and then two blokes walking a pub and, English, Scots and Irishman. And then the alternative was like Ben Elton talking about Mrs. Thatch and the two worlds were quite separate. And Lee very quickly found himself on the sort of wrong side of the tracks, as it were. And he was just a young lad. And he thought, I'll get into this alternative thing. And I don't want to sound like Mr. Charlie Big Potatoes, but I think I helped get him some gigs. And he was incredibly funny, though, and just a naturally incredibly funny man. In fact, probably the funniest man I've ever met in my life, who could just make you laugh without saying anything. He can wobble his eyebrows and make you laugh. He's just extraordinary. And then he got onto the what was the alternative comedy circuit then, and I gigged with him a lot because we were signed to the same agency. So we went out on the road when he was still a circuit comic. Yeah, he wasn't Lee Evans, the superstar. And I even had to follow him sometimes. And he was like, he'd go on in the middle and I'd have to go on after him. And that was hard work, I can tell you. And then in 93, won the Perrier.
Yes.
And then he just went stellar. But to show what a lovely bloke he was, he just said, oh, Rich, well, come and support me on my tours. Because we were sort of matey. And that thing where he said, oh, if I make it, I'll take you with me. And I thought, yeah, right. But he did. So I think I did 3 UK tours, 97, 98, 99, but his tours were like 80 gigs long. I mean, he was the hardest working man you've ever met in your life. And he would do an hour and 20 and have a standing ovation every night. I mean, seriously, they didn't just get up and stand up so they could go home. It's because he worked the audience so hard. And I'd be doing 20 minutes and I was exhausted. But he would do an hour and 20 for like 70, I think it was 75 to 80 nights a tour. And then we did the big ones, as you say, for the videos, because they were shooting vids.
Yeah, of course.
And then, so I ended up doing hundreds of shows with him, but it was a great run for me. I was absolutely delighted.
He was actually the first ever act that I saw live in the flesh at Nottingham. And on the subject of the multiple gigs, I was so annoyed with him because I'd purposely got up early in the morning, got onto the site for the Nottingham Arena, got my tickets. I thought I've got no one else is going to have tickets that I know. Yeah. And then bang, 10 dates come on after that. I was thinking, oh my goodness,
wow,
how is this guy doing it? But the way he'd layer up a joke, that's something that it was like almost like a boxer. Like he'd start with a jab, then work to the body, and then finish with a haymaker. And I was done by the break.
That's a great analogy, Chris. That's lovely. Yeah, well, he worked so hard on material, more so than any other comic, in as far as he would do the shows. He'd done the hour and 20. And as you know, when he comes off stage, he would be covered in sweat because he'd worked so hard. And his suit, it was like shaking the hand of a dog who just got out the river. Because he was just, you kept away from him. Because if you turn around quickly, you just get this whole swathe of sweat over you. And he had a big rack of suits, by the way, that he had to send to the cleaners one by one. Because we were doing 7 nights a week. And he couldn't wear that one till the 7 nights further away till it dried out, and then wear another one. And then he'd finish his show, the point being, and then start writing again. So him and his writer would write everything down, take note. Well, his writer would take notes in the wings while Lee was on stage. Then Lee would meet him afterwards. They'd have a bit of supper or something, and then they'd start writing again. We'd be in the bar having a beer, thinking we were, doing ever so well. And Lee would be up in his room with his writer, just like reaming out new stuff. And it was amazing the way that in a tour, he added an extra 45 to 60 minutes of material on tour, which by the end of it had worked its way in. And I've never seen anyone do that in quite the same way. Most people write the material for the tour, try it out beforehand, and that's it. You stick with that and then do your 60, 70 nights. Lee actually just improved it, and by the end of it had like twice as much stuff. So he was a really hard working guy.
I could definitely notice the difference because I went to see, I think it was Michael McIntyre the year after, perhaps. I think it was maybe Lee's second tour, might have gone XL then Big or something, maybe the other way around. But McIntyre's act seemed much more scripted than Lee Evans did, and I can see now why. With all the extra material coming in, that's just beyond genius.
Yes, and as you know, when all the acts started out on the circuit, they wrote their own stuff, and then when they did their first 1 hour show, and if it went stellar, that went onto a video or a DVD, and that would be it, for the tour. They couldn't use that stuff again. And a couple of them tried to and fell foul of that, and audiences went, no, they did the same last time. And we're talking about big ticketed arena shows. So they'd get writers in from that point onwards, which I I think it's perfectly acceptable. A lot of people said, oh, you meant to write your own jokes. But, they'd already written maybe 2 hours of stuff. There may be 2 separate hours before they did that. But I think with some acts, it's almost noticeable. And as you've pointed out, you can tell when it's not all you feel from them. So it's like writers saying, here, say this, this and this, and they go, yeah, I'll do that. Whereas some acts just seem naturally to... So I think, again, with somebody like Lee, it had to be completely what he wanted to do. I don't think he's ever gone out there and just done a joke unless he thought, no, I'll do it my way. It's got to be, the Lee Evans school of comedy. Whereas some comics, I mean, Michael's incredibly, talented in what he does. I think if you just gave him a joke, he could tell you it and make you laugh. But a lot of the comics changed their style slightly as well with the TV success, simply because they've run out of material. Sorry, I'm running out of voice.
Are you still in touch with Lee in his retirement?
Sort of, yes. He's actually gone very quiet, and I checked up on him the other week.
I bet he's knackered, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. All of them shows. Who couldn't be? I'm still in touch with Jack Dee regularly, because I used to do big tours with Jack as well. So, in fact, I went from the Jack Dee tours to the Lee Evans tours. And before I supported Jack Dee, Lee Evans supported Jack Dee. And apparently that was a hell of a tour. Apparently that was like rock and roll, right? They were just ripping up, houses all around the country. And Lee then became big enough to do his own shows, and I supported Jack. And then when Jack stopped touring for a bit, I then went to support Lee. So support act to the stars, that's me, Chris, that's my life. But yes, Jack Dee, I asked him and he said, yeah, Lee's just taking it easy. But I think because he's such a funny and comedically minded guy, I'm sure he'll come back and do something.
He's sort of done a bit of acting, I believe, in the theatres. I think that's maybe where his
and he did the films as well, do you remember? Because that's when I was on tour with him. I remember Mouse Hunt came out, we went to the premiere, that was lovely. Yes, so he's definitely got many strings. He's very musical as well, do you know that? He can compose and stuff, he's great.
Amazing.
He's too talented, that man.
Speaking of travelling as well, you've done festivals, I believe, is it in Montreal and Phoenix?
Yes, I did the Montreal Just for Laughs festival. That was a while back now, Chris. Oh, blimey. Getting best part of 20 years probably. But that was amazing because it's an invite-only thing. So you can't just rock up there. It's like Edinburgh, whatever. You can go and do your own show, but for the Just for Laughs, you've got to be invited. And I think there was like 6 or 7 British comics. So I was really honoured to be. It's like playing for England.
Oh yeah.
So that was a fantastic experience. And the Phoenix one, though, wasn't Phoenix, Arizona. If
was
that's
it
what
not?
you're thinking. I'd love to make it sound a bit more glamorous.
The Phoenix Club.
It was the Phoenix Club in Snibston, just outside of Leicester. I don't know if you know that place. No, I'm teasing you. It was in. It wasn't far. It was, I think, just outside Stratford-on-Avon. And it was a festival from the mid sort of 93, 94, 95. And I know I was on just before Eddie Izzard. He was the top act. But it was a cracking festival. And it was like a music one as well. But I don't think they run that one anymore. So, I did a lot of festivals. And they're hard, I feel, because you're playing in great big tents. People standing, not sitting, and often they just walk in and out of the tent because they're at a festival, they're not having to pay separately. And sometimes it's, if there's a major band about to start, they'll just walk out and see them, and you start with 400 and you end up with 12, or vice versa. So festivals are a real old rigmarole to play as a comedian.
So on the subject of festivals as well, a lot of comedians are playing Glastonbury, I believe, and sort of festivals like that.
Yes.
When you get an audience, like what I was going to allude to for that one was, if you get an audience in an intimate room, would you say it beats the bigger stage or the other way around?
Oh yeah, and I mean even because we've mentioned the Jack Dee, Lee Evans tours, when they used to play the mega theatres, like Hammersmith Apollo, I did 4 times for Jack Dee, and it was just like 3,500 people. It's enormous. You feel no sense of intimacy with the audience at all. You're just kind of on the stage, whacking out your jokes, hoping for a response. Whereas when you're in a little club, the front row is 2 feet away sometimes. And Jack and Lee would say the same thing, and they said, we miss all that, and we loved it at the Glee Club or the Comedy Store because you're so close to the audience. And even if it's a big 400-seater like the Store or somewhere, you've got that immediate response of a laughter. It hits you like a big wave. And when you're in the massive arenas, I think by the time Lee finished, his gigs were so big they had like huge screens of him either side, like at the O2, and people were actually watching a screen of him.
Yes,
yeah.
I remember. Yeah,
and great, because the ticket sales must be fantastic. But at the same time, I know most comics any day of the week would say, "Oh, just put me in, a much smaller room, because that's where it all feels so much better."
You sort of lose that intimacy a little bit in the arenas.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that I really found about club comedy, was when my first ever gig that I went to was in the Criterion, which unfortunately got shut down in Leicester for not paying its electricity bills.
Oh, okay.
Slightly random. Well, the PA kept cutting out, and now we know why. So.
Right.
But
Heckled it was off by the utility company. That's great.
It. Yeah, pull the plug, literally. Yeah. But the acts on there, it was literally a stage, a microphone, a few chairs. There were only about 20 people in there, but the noise coming off the audience, because of the acoustics of the room as well.
Yeah.
If you haven't been to club comedy, it's just something you've got to experience.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. In fact, I did a show last night in a little place, and I'm doing one tonight in another little place. I'm only in the little places now, Chris. But what still impresses me and amazes me is that people will pay good money to turn up to a comedy club when they don't really know any of the acts. I don't flatter myself. They've come to see me. They think, well, I'll pay me money, and there's going to be 3 or 4 acts on. I'll give it a go. Because I don't think that happens anywhere else in the entertainment world. I don't think we would say, there's a music venue up the road, Chris. There's 4 bands on. Let's go. Because you'd say, well, who are we going to go and watch? Whereas people will do that for comedy, and 9 times out of 10, I'm hoping, will leave the club going, that was a really good night. Even if they didn't like all the comics, they'd probably like 1 or 2 of them. And it's still a very healthy scene, the comedy scene, all around the UK, because people will think, well, I'm rocking up at the comedy club. It's a relatively cheap night out, and you can have a drink, and sometimes I think people are pleasantly surprised. It's like there's that giveaway when people come up to the end of the show and go, "You were really funny, mate." And what they're really saying is, we didn't think you were going to be really funny. We didn't really rate this. We just rocked up thinking, we'll give it a go. And they walk out of there thinking, and it's a wonderful thing. People say, we're coming back. I'm telling me mates. And I think that's kept the whole thing fresh and alive. And for everybody, it's like, even when established acts turn up in clubs, there's that lovely, whoa, look, somebody off the telly. And they're just as happy to see them as they are for new acts. And people say, give this guy a go. It's their first try or something. So I think, it's a lovely, healthy scene still.
Definitely. Just finally, you've got you did a radio show back in 2015 called, was it TV Theme Tunes?
Oh yeah, the lost art of the TV.
That's the one, yeah. An amazing listen. I'll leave the link in the description box below for the YouTube listeners. What inspired that?
Well, before I became a comic, as I mentioned, I was a musician. Before the Panic Brothers, which was just like a little country rockabilly witty song, 2 guitar, 2 voice act, I actually wanted to write proper, TV themes and film themes. I wasn't good enough, to be honest with you. And then many, many years later, 25 years later, I thought I'm going to give that a go. So I play TV themes just for fun anyway. In my car, I've got like the Sweeney theme and the Persuaders theme and the Avengers. Just for fun, I love to hear them. And so I thought, what I'll do is I'll try and write some themes in the style of, like an homage. I want to try and not rip them off, So I came out with an album called The Theme That Never Was, and it was like telly shows that never came out in the 60s and 70s. And I wrote little stories that never happened, or films that never got released. And it got really good reviews, and it got picked up, and the BBC picked it up and just said, this is really interesting. Would you like to make a radio show on Radio 4 about your thing? And I said, I'd absolutely love to. And then just before we made the show, the producer got back to me and said, do you know what, we're not allowed to, because it's like promoting your CD. It's like, promoting a product, and it's BBC. And they said, we're really sorry, but however, would you like to make a show about TV themes in general, because it's something you really like, and we'll stick some of yours in as well. And I went, that's perfect. So it was just a labour of love, really. And it's like the best, like when you do radio, as Chris, when you're actually doing a subject you like and you involve other people in it you like, it's just, I didn't even want to be paid for it. I did get paid. But it's just that thing where it was such a pleasure. And then you meet TV composers and they tell you about, how they come up with their little ideas and whatever. So, and there's another one called The Sequel That Never Was, about films that never got made into a sequel, like The Italian Job. I was always obsessed with the idea of that bus on the end of the cliff.
Yes,
and I thought, well, what would have happened? So I wrote an album of sequels to films that never had one. And that got well reviewed. And the BBC, in fact, I think that was the thing that tipped the balance to get me those shows, have said, we'll do another show sometime. So if they do, I'd be delighted. Thank you.
That's any of the BBC, if you're listening to this podcast, sign Richard up for another
He's
story.
still available.
Yeah. I suppose the final question, I feel like we need to do a part 2 to this podcast, because there's so much more I think we could go into. It's been fantastic. But I ask every comedian this on the podcast, what is your favourite service station?
My favourite service station, now you've put me right on the spot.
It could be Canada or this country.
Oh, it'd definitely be in this country, because I'm at them all the time. There's that one in Oxford that's got the fountains outside. That's very posh. And there's that one on the M6 toll. I'm being Charlie Big Potatoes now, which I don't often use because obviously you have to pay money. And I think it's called Norton Keynes. And it's like Selfridges in there. It's unbelievable. In fact, when you walk in, you sort of wipe your feet because you think it's so posh in here. I've straightened my tie up and everything. That one. And there's a really fantastic 60s looking one just outside of Lancaster. And it's called, is it Charnock Richard? And it's like got a tower that looks like the BT Tower in London.
Yes.
And it's like Space Age, so it's like being in space 1999. There's a TV show. But basically, any of them that aren't too crowded, too noisy, and they can actually sell you coffee under about a £5, I'd be happy to go to.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Richard Morton.
Thank
It's
you,
been an
Chris.
absolute
Thanks for
pleasure
having me.
talking to you. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can also do it on iTunes. Like, share, subscribe, as I've said before. And I'll see you on the next podcast. Thank you very much.